Hello, everybody. It's the Historical Gamer once again, and it's been a little while since my last video. My wife and I were just in the process of moving, so I've actually been without internet for over half a week, actually almost a week, and haven't been able to post or really do much of anything. It wasn't supposed to be that long of a time without internet, but we had some issues at our new home getting things set up. That being said, I am back. So that's the good news. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about a game that was announced a little while ago. I think it was about a week ago or so. A brand new game was announced by MicroProse, and I don't think I've done a video about MicroProse. They're, an old classic in the simulation genre. The publishers of games like Falcon 4.0 and a number of other strategy titles back in the day. And, one of the games that I played a whole bunch of when I was younger was kind of toward the tail end of MicroProse. It was, I think it might have actually been published by Atari at the time. That was B-17, the Mighty Eighth. And I haven't really talked a lot on the channel about them coming back, but the brand has been restarted, and they are in the process of working on a number of titles. And one of the games that they just announced that they're going to be publishing, they're not developing it, but they're publishing it, is what I want to talk to you about today. And so the trailer that you see in front of you right now is from a game that they announced in the last week or so. It's a game called Regiments, and the premise is basically that it's 1989, World War III has begun, and you're in Germany, I presume with the Soviet armored blitz into Germany. You're in command of a regiment, as you would guess from the title, and essentially, you have to fight battles in sort of a real-time tactical way. It looks very similar to, at least in concept, to some of the stuff that Eugen Systems used to do with their Wargame series. They had a Cold War series of games, Wargame European Escalation, Wargame Airland Battle, and then a slightly more modern version, Wargame Red Dragon, which was the last of the Wargame series. They've since gone on to work on the Steel Division games, which are World War II. It's the same concept, but it looks at World War II, so a very different type of combat in World War II as opposed to Cold War gone hot. And so I think you see a lot of similarities between this and Eugen Systems' Wargame series, although there's definitely some pretty big differences as well. This isn't a clone in the way that Cold War game was, which was another title that literally looked like they ripped everything from the War Game series and made the graphics a bit better, but the UI looked like they literally just copied and pasted it on, and the gameplay from that game looked like they just copied it and pasted it on, and lo and behold, within a couple of days going on Steam, they got a cease and desist, I guess, from Eugen, and they haven't been back up, and it's been over 2 months. But in this case, Regiments doesn't look anything like that. It looks pretty interesting. So, from what I've heard and what I've seen, I think they're going to be having more of a single-player focus. The concept here is that you're leading a regiment through World War III. The unit commands are a bit different. In Wargame, you command individual units. You command individual tanks, individual vehicles, individual squads of infantry. Whereas in this game, the concept is at a platoon level. So you would command a platoon of tanks. I've seen a little bit of videos out there on the gameplay. It looks like you'd select a platoon of 4 Leopard tanks or something like that. And you would issue orders to the entire group of tanks as opposed to an individual tank. Likewise, your BMPs or AFVs or whatnot, you can tell them to dismount their infantry troops out of the back of the vehicle, but when the infantry gets out, they're still tied to the tanks, so you're still, or to the IFV. So you're issuing orders to the entire unit, and the IFV will operate and support the infantry, and it will fire and act as its own unit, but it will receive your commands as a member of a wider unit, of a wider platoon or whatnot. So I think that's pretty interesting. I think it's definitely a different concept than what we've seen before, tying these units together in larger units. It's almost like taking combat mission and saying instead of commanding an individual tank or individual vehicle, you command, 4 of them all linked together. But it's a little bit different than that too, though. So I'm really curious to see how that'll play and how that'll work. They're very adamant. The first bullet of their main features is a single player focused featuring a fully dynamic campaign, skirmish mode, and efficient yet aggressive and relentless AI. So they seem to be making a point that this game is going to put a lot of effort into the single player campaign, which is good. I think one of the real weaknesses of the Wargame series was that it was too focused on multiplayer competitive, which is where a lot of the fans of the Wargame series came down. But in my opinion, I think there was always a great missed opportunity to have a real dynamic and interesting campaign. They do have campaign elements in Wargame Air Land Battle, which I played a fair amount of, and there are, I believe, some campaign elements in Red Dragon, which I played a lot less of. But it was never the focus of the game, and you could tell. So I'm really curious to see how that'll play out. It'll be interesting, if you're commanding a regiment and you are in World War III, how long is your regiment an effective unit? Like, if you're really taking casualties and it progresses through a World War III scenario, I would imagine a frontline regiment would get chewed up pretty damn quick in 1989 with all the the anti-tank guided missiles and all the other smart weapons that are starting to evolve around that period of time. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Some of the other main features that they're talking about here: refined controls that make commanding hundreds of soldiers a breeze. I think that's the platoon system. On the fly customization, rewarding adaptability and creativity. So force customization, that's a big part of the Wargame series, where people sort of create and modify their own decks. I'm not sure you'll have that level of customization, because I believe you'll have like presets based on the regiment that you're commanding, and then presumably you can make tweaks to it, but you're still operating within the confines of a regiment. So we'll see how much that changes. Deep game mechanics simulating Cold War era mechanized fight with great detail while still being accessible to novice RTS players. So I think the fact that you're commanding units rather than individuals is going to take a little bit of the MicroProse clickfest nature of some of these types of games away from it, and it'll make it a little bit more approachable, which I think is a good thing. I'm curious to see how they blend this, right? Like, I think, in my mind, the interesting balance that they could be trying to strike is something between, they're trying to thread the needle between something like Combat Mission, which is more groggy, and Wargame, which is more RTS-y. And if they're trying to thread that needle right between those, it could be pretty interesting to see if they can pull that off. Visceral effects, World War II bringing to your screen, blah, blah, blah. Apparently they will have 4 key Cold War factions: the Soviet Union, the USA, West Germany, and East Germany. So they're definitely taking a German-centric approach. I would hopefully expect to see that roster increase post-launch, adding in other NATO forces, adding in the British, adding in the French, adding in the Polish or other East Bloc countries. The game is going to start anyway with over 60 authentic vehicles modeled into multitude of different formations, such as the Leopard 2, T-72M, M2 Bradley fighting vehicle, and apparently the game will have 3 different game modes. So I believe that's campaign, skirmish, and I'm not actually sure what that means. So that being said, this is a new game. It was just announced by MicroProse. It is being developed by a studio called Bird's Eye Games. They actually had for a brief period of time, there was a demo available on Steam that was accessible during some sort of like indie promo type deal. So this is not developed by MicroProse. It's developed by another company or another group. It is, I think it's actually one dev. I was talking with Admiral Crappard, who is the head of the Task Force Admiral guys, which is another MicroProse games that I'm pretty excited about. I may do a video about that eventually. But I guess the developer's name is Mikhail, and that's all I know about the developer. They don't have any other games. This is their first game, so this is going to be an interesting effort. I think an ambitious effort, but an interesting effort nonetheless. I also think one other interesting piece that was announced a little while ago, actually, this was back in June. Apparently there's been a Steam page for this since June, although the announcement of the partnership with MicroProse is only very recent, is I mentioned earlier that it's a single-player focused campaign or a single-player focused game, and apparently it is exclusively single player, so there will be no multiplayer in the game, at least initially. I mean, who knows? Maybe if it's a huge hit, they'll add it. But the developer has posted some stuff on Steam talking about how this is going to be a single player only game. So makes sense why you would do a single player focused game if there's no multiplayer. That could turn off some folks who are really into these types of games. I think one of the really big pulls from the Wargame series was that ability to play multiplayer, that ability to do co-op gameplays. I've done it a few times in the Steel Division games with friends, and also in Red Dragon and Air Land Battle, where we've done multiple people on the same side, often just fighting against the AI. It's a really fun co-op type experience. And so maybe lacking that could be a hindrance to this game. It could be a drawback. But again, it's the developer's first game, so we'll see how that all plays out. I'm really curious to see more about this, to learn more about this. I think this is a very ambitious looking game, but I also, I don't know what to expect. I think MicroProse has really been hitting it out of the park with game announcements in any event, right? They're working on a B-17, the Mighty Eighth remaster. They're making a really interesting Pacific war game, or publishing it anyway, called Task Force Admiral. That's going to be focused on the South Pacific in 1942 with like carrier battles and things like that. They're working or publishing a pair of FPSs as well. And then they're also working on kind of a hex-based war game called Second Front, or again, publishing a hex-based war game called Second Front. So they've got a number of titles that are all in development. Now, Regiments isn't coming out until 2021. I don't believe that any of the other games I've mentioned are coming out till 2021 either. I'm not sure when Second Front is coming out. That feels like, based on what I've seen, that it would be sooner, but it still has a TBA on the release page on Steam. I haven't seen anything official about it coming this year, so that could be 2021 as well. But between the two FPSs, Task Force Admiral, Regiments, and Second Front, that's at least 5 games that look slated for some period in 2021. B-17, the Mighty Eighth, might be 2021. It could be further out. We really haven't seen much of anything from that other than them announcing it and a couple of 3D static images of some equipment on the B-17. So that one's probably a ways further out. But in any event, it looks like they're really aimed on hitting the ground running next year and releasing a lot of games and hopefully being successful, because I think, as MicroProse attempts to get back into the simulation and into the wargaming and strategy gaming space, it'll be really interesting. Most of the games they've shown so far look like a higher production value than most strategy and war games that we see out there today. There's a few exceptions, right? Like the Game Lab folks make really good-looking games, and we've definitely, seen some other good-looking games as well. But I think that generally speaking, the strategy and wargaming space is sort of known for this outdated look and feel of their games. And that's not always fair. I think a lot of times the design decisions are deliberate and they still convey what they're trying to do very well. No, I don't think anyone would say that War in the Pacific looks good, but I think it's still the best Pacific war game ever made. The Command Modern Air Naval Operations games don't necessarily look pretty in the sense that they don't have amazing 3D graphics, and yet I think they're one of the best simulation games ever made, and they convey what they're trying to do with their imagery effectively. So I don't think you necessarily need to have stunning graphics to have a good or a successful game, but I do think that MicroProse has made a very deliberate decision about the games that they are publishing and that they are making, that they do want them to look fairly modern, right? They may not be Call of Duty graphics or Crisis graphics, but I think they're making a decision to say, listen, the aesthetics and the visuals are part of drawing in a wider audience, and they're not trying to do what some of the really hardcore grog games are doing. They're trying to find that middle ground between clickfest, mainstream but not terribly interesting strategy games, and the ultra hardcore grog games. And based on what we've seen so far, I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty encouraged. But again, we haven't played any of these games yet, so who knows how they'll actually turn out. And then, does adding that level of detail and that level of fidelity drive the development costs up past the point where, what's the market for these kind of games that are threading the needle? Is the market big enough to support the additional cost that goes into some of these quality of life things? We don't know the answer to that, and we won't find that out until they start releasing games. But I think it's an exciting time to be a strategy and wargamer, and I'm excited to see what comes next. But Regiments looks really interesting. Looks like something I definitely want to play, and will definitely stream and show on the channel. But that's about all I have to say about it right now. Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. And until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying once again, it's good to be back. And until next time, I'm out.